Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Battlefields and Bourbon podcast, the podcast where we talk bourbon whiskey and American Civil War history. I'm Elijah, joined by my co-host Jack, and we've got a special one for you tonight. We've got Blanton's single barrel bourbon from Buffalo Trace Distillery over in Frankfort, Kentucky. So a single barrel bourbon is a bourbon, as the name notates, comes from one single barrel, and that does a lot for the flavor of a bourbon. I mean, it can change the flavor profile from barrel to barrel, depending on the age, the level in the rick house that it was aged, all this different kinds of stuff kind of playing into what brings that flavor profile. Obviously, it's the same recipe, so it's not going to have too much difference, but you'll notice some subtle nuances here and there of different, flavor notes that kind of poke through more than others, depending on the bottle, depending on the barrel, all that good stuff. These bottles are actually bottled by hand, so that way no other bottling machinery or anything gets any other residue from other bourbons in the bottle. So it's a true single barrel. The idea for this single barrel bourbon came in 1984 to revitalize a dying bourbon market. Elmer T. Lee was the master distiller at the time at Buffalo Trace, and he thought that the bourbon market needs something new. It needs something kind of exciting to try to bring the boom back, because in the 80s, it was more like the clear liquor and that kind of thing. So bourbon as a whole was kind of on its way out. I mean, distilleries were closing up, and that's how Buffalo Trace became the one to acquire so many different brands, such as like Eagle Rare and Buffalo Trace and all these other different name brands that they have. Elmer T. Lee launched the Blanton's single barrel bourbon in 1984 as a way to commemorate Albert Blanton, a plant manager at Buffalo Trace back in the day. And the idea was that Albert Blanton preferred his bourbon from one single barrel and warehouse H. So whenever he would have like social gatherings, any kind of like just, hey, I want a bourbon, he'd tell his fellas to go grab him a barrel from warehouse H. And that's where the idea kind of came from. The one thing about Warehouse H that kind of makes it unique is that it's the only metal-sided warehouse at Buffalo Trace. So everywhere else, it's all brick, like Warehouse C, where E.H. Taylor's aged. That's a brick warehouse. So a sheet metal warehouse like that's going to kind of heat up faster. The temperature is going to be a little more variable, especially in those hot Kentucky summers. So you're going to get a lot more volatility, I would say, in terms of the flavor that you're going to get from that. So Blanton's is aged, I believe, 6 to 8 years. Depends on the barrel, and obviously the master distiller deciding when a barrel is mature enough to bottle. Blanton's is, at least the baseline Blanton's is bottled at 93 proof. So that's going to be 46.5% alcohol by volume, if you care about that. This is their mash bill number 2. That's their high rye mash bill, and the experts believe that it's in the 10 to 12% rye range. There's no real way of knowing because they don't disclose their mash bills. And I believe last week we had maybe mentioned, I think you might have mentioned high rye being moonshine. And I wanted to clear that up for our listeners just because I don't know if there's any confusion on that. So moonshine is what Buffalo Trace would call white dog. Other distilleries would call it high wine, new make. There's all different kinds of names for it. But really what that is the clear liquor that's fresh off the still.
Okay.
So that's like after it's been run, before you put it in the barrel, that's your moonshine, quote unquote. So not necessarily the mash bill that has anything to do with it, what it is in terms of shine or white dog or whatever that is. So I just wanted to clear that one up in case that might have confused anybody last week. But with Blanton's and just about any other Buffalo Trace product, like I mentioned last week as well, you got to be careful of the price gougers, because Blanton's MSRP on that one is about $60. But normally you'll see that going for, I've seen it go for as much as $250. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money, but please don't do that. I mean, that's just the secondary market is just insane as it is, and we don't need any more of that being contributed to it. But yeah, a cool fact about the Blanton's bourbon is that the cork on top, you guys can't see it because we're not filming this one. It's got a little horse jockey on the top, and I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this one. The jockey is in different positions, and it kind of demonstrates the jockey going through an entire derby race. And at the bottom of the horse on each cork top is a letter. And the letters spell out Blanton. So you've got your Blantons. And if you collect all those horse tops, it'll show you kind of the progression of the race. And if you collect them all, you can send them off to Buffalo Trace, and I believe they'll mount them on a barrel stave for you and send it back to you as like kind of a, hey, congrats on buying all of our stuff type of thing. But yeah, we can get right into this one and see what we think of it. I know I've had this one quite a few times, but this is your first time, Jack, right?
Yeah, based off visual alone. I mean, this is a very appealing bottle.
Oh yeah, the presentation on this thing, they've got that down. Buffalo Trace has mastered that one.
Being was this something, the bottle, that was a part of it back when they first started producing it in like the 80s? Or
yeah, this has been the original bottle style since the get, and I think that's part of what makes it so unique and so recognizable. I mean, like this bottle looks like what bourbon should be bottled in. I mean, this is like it just looks like a gentleman's drink.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, if you want to taste it, give it a shot. I mean, give it a little nosing, see what you think. Yeah, learning all the techniques from last week, right? For me personally, I always pick up a lot of brown sugar, caramel vanilla off of that one. Mm-hmm. And I know for being a higher rye bourbon, it's supposed to give you more of like a spiciness. You might pick that up a little bit, but me personally, I get a lot of like baking spices and like a sugary sweetness out of that one. I mean, that's just me personally. Some people will attack you for the way that you feel. I can
see where you're coming from on the spices.
Yeah.
Because it's not your traditional, like, burn your mouth liquor. It's like the spices that's creating that flavor. And I get that.
Yeah, that heat's not like an alcohol burn. It's more of like your baking spices and stuff. It's really enjoyable. I mean, people will... what's a nice way to put this? People will crap on Blanton's either because they can't get it, or they can't get it for resale, or just the overall hype around it. I mean, the hype is real with this one in terms of people chasing it down and trying to collect them all. I mean, I personally would never pay more than retail for any bourbon. That's just me. A lot of people will do that. They will gladly pay a lot of money for this stuff.
Just to have it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good stuff. It's good bourbon, but the craze behind it, I think, has kind of soured people's taste for it because, I mean, it'll do that with anything. I mean, anything nice, when a bunch of people find out about it and kind of ruin it for the rest of us, it'll kind of steer you away from it.
Well, we were talking about this in episode 1 with Eagle Rare. It's one of those ones that's like, gets knocked down a bunch by people, but it's because it's a good bourbon, and it's the craze behind it's legit, and I could see where the same is for this bourbon here.
Yeah, any of Buffalo Trace's, I guess what you would call Trinity, Buffalo Trace, Eagle Rare, Blanton's, they're all good bourbons. Like I don't think anybody's saying that they're not. It's just the fact that people think that they're overhyped or, chased after too much to the point where it just doesn't make it enjoyable anymore. Because if you could go into a store and find this thing sitting on the shelf and just grab it whenever you want it and like crack a bottle and have it with your friends and not have to worry about savoring the bottle as like, I have to make this thing last for a year because I never know when I'll see it again. Mm-hmm. That can kind of deter people. And luckily for some of our bourbon lovers, some people probably already know this, Buffalo Trace is doing their expansion. They started that, I want to say maybe a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. Pretty big expansion. I mean, I don't know the exact dollar amount, but it's massive. I mean, they bought land across the river from the distillery to start popping up more warehouses and stuff. They just, I believe earlier this spring, opened up another column still to double their production. So that extra column still is producing an extra 60,000 gallons of whiskey a day.
That's crazy.
And that's obviously got to go towards all their brands because they own a whole slew of brands. But 60,000 gallons a day, and one barrel holds 53 gallons. I mean, you're in a few years, I mean, obviously got to take some time to age and stuff, but in a few years, I think the market for Buffalo Trace products will start to kind of replenish itself. I mean, it's going to be, I don't want to say everywhere because people will still hoard it, but it'll be a lot easier to find, I think, and that'll be promising for some people that may have been a little soured towards Buffalo Trace and their products beforehand or in current day. So something to look forward to in the future.
Yeah, for sure.
When we're older.
But I guess, Elijah, do you want to let the audience know why we picked this bourbon for this episode?
Sure. Yeah. So aside from it being a mouthful, Blanton's and Brandy Station, Battlefields and Bourbon, a bunch of B's here. The horse on top is going to go right into the battle that we're talking about, Brandy Station being one of the largest cavalry battles in the American Civil War. And like I said, Brandy Station. So this one is June 9th, 1863, part of our Gettysburg campaign. There's a lot of different discrepancies. I don't want to say discrepancies, a lot of opinions on Brandy Station as what it was. The largest cavalry battle, largest cavalry charge.
Yeah, I mean...
Largest battle with cavalry.
Yeah,
I mean,
what are we
doing here? You
and I were talking before the podcast about this and the research we've been doing. I'm looking at the Battle of Brandy Station by Eric J. Wittenberg. It's done through History Press, and the subtitle of that is North America's Largest Cavalry Battle. And then that got me thinking, okay, but there's infantry involved. And then I hear some of the professionals of the battle talking. And they're trying to explain it themselves, but it's just like I'm having a really difficult time. And this is just me, I guess, defining what it is, because there is infantry from the Federals that are engaged, and they're there. They're a part of the plan. So I know, like, the battle, the largest only cavalry battle is Trevilian Station. And then before this point, I think they say the largest cavalry battle up before Brandy Station during the war is Kelly's Ford, which is just a little bit before that. And then Brandy Station happens. I mean, it's definitely the largest, mostly cavalry battle, I guess, if that makes sense. I don't know.
That'll simplify it for some people.
Yeah, if anybody has a clear definition of how we can identify this battle legitimately, please reach out and let us know. Because I'm not saying it's one thing or the other. It's just I cannot process what this is. But
yeah, it can be confusing.
There's a lot of horses, but there's some guys that are marching. So, but it's definitely a fascinating battle. And yeah, continue with what information you've got for this, Elijah.
Yeah. So this is going to take place just after Chancellorsville. Jackson had just passed away and everything like that. And Stuart and his men are kind of falling back to the vicinity of Culpeper Courthouse just to kind of, regroup, see what the next plan is. Obviously, the Gettysburg campaign is kind of in its early stages here. And Stuart's just in camp at Brandy Station. His cavalry are just kind of resting after the battle and the campaign that they've been on with Chancellorsville. And they kind of get caught off guard by Alfred Pleasanton's cavalry. And in the worst way possible, too, because Stuart, in the days prior, had his men get up in their best and, go out to Inlet Station to do a grand review for General Lee. And they get out there, and they're all in their best, and they're all ready to go, and Lee doesn't show for this one. So, at least this is my understanding of it. Lee doesn't show, and Stuart's like, well, I'll review you guys anyway. We'll come back tomorrow or a day or two later, and run it back for Lee. Yeah.
Run it back.
So, they do it again, all in their best and all that stuff. And on top of that, they do what I understand is a simulated battle, a mock battle. So they do like a demo cavalry charge and an artillery demonstration and all this other stuff, which seems kind of, I don't want to say wasteful, but kind of wasteful because you're tiring out your men, your horses. Obviously, any metal detectorist, relic hunter, archaeologist knows that anytime this is happening, they're dropping bullets. Whether they're in battle or not, they're in camp. So they're kind of expending ammunition that they need to be hanging on to for Gettysburg, because every little bit is going to be counting for Gettysburg and the Gettysburg campaign. Because if they're going to invade north, you want to have as much supplies and ammunition as you've got, instead of kind of, throwing it willy-nilly at, let's do a grand review right now because we're about to go north. Like that idea to me doesn't seem great. And I know Stuart faced some backlash from some of the Confederate newspapers about, just kind of trying to be, I don't know if they called him arrogant, but it was more so kind of an arrogance to him.
Well, he had balls after these too. Like he had dances that he hosted after each review. So twice he'll host these balls where he's inviting guests and people are coming down from, political spheres and things like that to come watch the reviews, but then also partake in these Jeb Stuart balls. So it's, these highfalutin, places and these people that are coming, and it's just Jeb Stuart in his element with that.
Absolutely. The dashing cavalier has to put on a show, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So, he's doing all this stuff, and June 9th comes around, and his men are in camp. The horse artillery, I guess it would be like John Pelham's guys and everything, are in camp as well. And they're the ones that get surprise attacked first, I guess,
Pelham's dead.
At that point.
Yeah, he's killed at Kelly's Ford.
That's right. So excuse me on that one. So it would be Stuart's horse artillery minus John Pelham. And the artillery is there kind of at the fords where they can kind of swing the guns if they need to in the event of an attack, and they're not really prepared for it. Pleasanton's cavalry is coming, and they catch them off guard, and then the rest just kind of turns to hell. So
yeah.
What do you think about that?
So, Jeb Stuart's there. He's got, I guess they're brigade commanders at the Confederate level with, let me get my people here. Jones Brigade, William Henry Fitzhugh Lee's brigade, Hampton's brigade, Robert's brigade. All those guys are there. And at the same time, Pleasanton or John Buford, the division commander under Pleasanton, knows this because they've got intel that they're receiving from across the Rappahannock River. And that's what's separating these armies is the Rappahannock River. And and the Confederate cavalry at the time is acting like a screen between what Lee's trying to do ultimately, and that's to get his army west and then up, whether it's on one side of the Blue Ridge, like we discussed with 2nd Winchester, or on the other side. So the cavalry is their intention is to be a screen or an object in between the Federals in the main Confederate force moving north. We got to keep in mind that this battle, it's important afterwards, but also it's important in the moment for defining what will be Federal cavalry for the remainder of the war.
This is like their big hurrah.
This is it. Joe Hooker, who's still in command at this point of the Army of the Potomac, has created the Cavalry Corps, put Alfred Pleasanton in charge of it, and this is the first time that cavalry will be used like cavalry should be used, in a sense, and be combined as one corps, not as small regiments that are attached to infantry and under the command of infantry leadership to be as couriers or scouts or things like that. They're being used as horse soldiers, and that's important because the Confederates more or less have been acting in that fashion as the Cavaliers, for the period leading up to Brandy Station.
Right.
And like you said, Jeb Stuart's camped in and around this area with those other brigades of the Confederate cavalry there. How it's going to kick off is Alfred Pleasanton's going to split himself into wings with John Buford's division moving towards Beverly's Ford, which is kind of on the northern side of the battlefield if you're looking at a map, northeastern side. And then about 6 miles downstream from there is Kelly's Ford. And that's where Greg and Greg and Dufay is under him or with him is going to cross as well. And the target is Brandy Station. To meet there and then rendezvous at Brandy Station, clean up everything on the way, and then move towards Culpeper Courthouse. So that's the plan going into it. And about 4:30 in the morning, John Buford's cavalrymen will cross, with specifically leading off the stepping off point of this battle is the 8th New York Cavalry, being personally led by Benjamin Grimes Davis, who is, I believe, first cousins with President Jefferson Davis, and he is
ironic.
He's a loyal man to the United States, and he is leading his former regiment, the 8th New York Cavalry, across. They're going to come into contact with skirmishers from the 6th Virginia Cavalry, there along the Beverly's Ford Road. And as they're coming in the early mornings, the Confederates are breaking, they're hearing the pops going off. They know something's coming. So more Confederate forces are going to start being pumped in. Dan Davis, who I'm going to mention quite a bit, I guess, in this episode, historian, he kind of uses the reference poking of the sleeping bear or the hornet's nest per se. Mm-hmm. And it's, this couple skirmishers, which is just going to turn into one big thing. And if you look at the maps of this battle, that's exactly what happens. There's a great account that as Benjamin Grimes Davis is leading these troops across the Rappahannock River, and as he's coming into contact with the 6th Virginia Cavalry, he notices this connection between the two regiments, and he's gonna take leadership and lead them across up the road. During that, he's gonna sense something behind him as he's leading his men along, and as he turns around, he swings his saber at another. It's Lieutenant Robert Allen of the 6th Virginia, and he's going to swing his saber at him. Allen's going to duck that saber, pull his revolver, and shoot him square in the forehead.
Oh, gosh.
And he'll drop dead before he can even touch the ground. So that's what's, starting off this battle. It's pretty intense. But, the last thing he says to those boys is stand firm, 8th New York, and then he's killed right after that. Actually,
that's not very motivating.
Yeah, not at all. The first casualty is going to be taken during this. The first casualty of the Gettysburg campaign is going to be taken during this beginning action. It's not Grimes Davis. It's going to be Henry Cutler, I believe, of the 8th New York, and he'll be the first casualty of the Gettysburg campaign. So to put it in a little bit of perspective there. Ultimately, like historian Dan Davis says, he definitely woke up the hornet's nest here, and during this time, more of the Federals are going to start coming across and fanning out. So he's thinking, okay, if I can't get around the Confederates that are coming to me on the Beverly's Ford Road, let me spread out to the right and to the left and move around them. But what he's just going to come into contact with then is more Confederates that are there, specifically under Grumble Jones and Wade Hampton's Confederates that are there. The more regiments coming onto the field. There's some United States cavalry units, some New York units, West Virginia, Indiana, and Pennsylvanians. They're going to come out, and this is in the general vicinity, and we'll talk about the modern-day battlefield towards the end. But if you are familiar with where the Culpeper Regional Airport is there, this is right across the grounds there. The Beverly Ford Road hugs the border of that property, so it's just right through there. And the Confederates are going to form a position on where St. James Church is, St. James Episcopal Church. This was a church that was there at the time of the battle. It's a brick structure. Today it's no longer standing, but it's along the roads there and the ridge that's on, where the Confederates under Grumble Jones and Wade Hampton are going to form a defensive position with some of that artillery forming up and opening fire towards the ground in front of them where the Federals are coming from. And then as the road kind of that way turns, Grumble Jones's men, the 6th and 7th Virginia Cavalry, is going to form on that side, forming like an L-shaped line. And this is where some of those, the first beginning charges are going to take place, these open cavalry charges against the Confederate positions. There's an account. So during this fighting, and I'll use a couple quotes in this, during this fighting, and it's hot and heavy with these cavalry charges moving across a lot of open ground in front of these Confederates. There's a lot of ravines, so the terrain's not perfectly flat. So as they're approaching the Confederates, they're going to dip down into a ravine and lose sight of them and then come back up. But there's an account from Grumble Jones about learning about the advance of Gregg's men. And remember, I said Gregg's is crossing at Kelly's Ford, so about 6 miles from this vicinity, roughly. Mm-hmm. So Grumble Jones has couriers coming back and forth to him all day, just notifying him of movements and things like that. And he gets word about Gregg crossing Kelly's Ford and coming into the vicinity of Brandy Station. And after hearing this, he sends a courier to Stuart to let him know. He's the superior. Let me let Stuart know what's going on.
Right.
Because Stuart's headquarters is on Fleetwood Hill,
Mm-hmm.
which is a little bit to the, I guess it would be the southwest of where the area of St. James Church, where Jones and Hampton are fighting and engaged with the Federals currently, under Whiting, I believe, in Devon. So he's going to send his courier to go talk to, let his commander, Jeb Stuart, know that there's some Federals headed his way. Well, Stuart hears this and he's like, he's like, tell General Jones to attend to the Yankees in his front and I'll watch for the flanks. When Jones heard Stuart's response, Jones replied very, angrily. So he thinks they ain't coming, does he? Well, let him alone. He'll damned well soon see for himself. And that he does.
He's gonna find out. Yeah,
he's gonna
exactly
find
right.
out.
Exactly right.
So as the fighting continues in the vicinity of St. James Church, ultimately focus is going to shift because of Gregg's force coming towards the area of Brandy Station, which is closer to Fleetwood Hill.
So that's where the action begins to shift southward towards Fleetwood Hill.
So this will shift for the Confederates, but at the same time, the Federal focus will then shift, specifically Buford's focus, which is the right wing of this Federal attack. Buford's focus will shift, but not towards Fleetwood Hill. Buford's focus will shift in the direction of U Ridge, which is just a little ways down. There's an area known as Buford's Knoll today, and that's where Buford will get to the field assess and put some artillery there. It's a high position for the Federals as they're coming into the battlefield. So he'll come into contact with some Federals under Rooney Lee to what would be his right. So as the battle at the action at St. James Church begins to shift, it doesn't seem to, no progress is made. Confederates arrive to the right of he's going to want to go around this. Okay. So, this is as a result of trying to go around the Confederates he was getting stuck with on Beverly's Ford Road. So he's like, all right, well, let's go around again. Well, what's in his way is a stone wall that is being occupied by Rooney Lee in his Virginia and North Carolina regiments of cavalry there. So that's where Buford's focus will shift. At the same time, Stuart has his own courier. I'm trying to remember the name of him offhand. I don't know if I have it on me, but last name McClellan. And I think he's first cousins with McClellan. So weird stuff here, but he's with Stuart this time.
Right.
So he's as Stuart's riding between the area of St. James Church and Fleetwood Hill, which all the main Confederate focus is shift towards the area of St. James Church because that's where the fighting's coming. But now there's, Stuart's at least heard per Jones that Federals are in pursuit of Brandy Station. Federals have at least crossed Kelly's Ford
from the south
and are headed north towards Brandy Station. So he's got wind of this, but he's not believing it. And then all of a sudden, a Confederate gun comes rushing towards the vicinity of Fleetwood Hill from the direction of Brandy Station. And as that happens, the Yankees are at Brandy, yelled as the riders raced up to Stuart at St. James Church. At that point, once Stuart gets wind that from behind him, the Federals are coming.
Now he's starting to believe it.
Yeah.
He's like, wait a minute, he might be right.
So he dispatches the 12th Virginia Cavalry, 35th Battalion of Virginia Cavalry, so Jones Brigade, at that point, and then tells McClellan, his scout or his courier, to go for Hampton. So send Wade Hampton. Stuart, tells one of his staff officers to come, for God's sakes, bring Hampton. So he needs that second brigade from the area of St. James Church to come to Fleetwood Hill. And I don't know have you been out to the battlefield yet ever to...
I've actually not been down that way. I've passed Kelly's Ford on my way to Orange County before, but never to the battlefield itself to see like the landscape and stuff.
Yeah, and I'll talk about this at the end. It's to see how close these spots are, but then the terrain of them. It really puts in perspective, the challenges, but then also at the same time the weaknesses that this position the Confederates had held for them. So what's ultimately going to happen once Jones and Hampton, obviously Jones' couple regiments were pulled first to go towards Fleetwood Hill. At that point, that's those couple Virginia cavalry regiments, and at that point, Wyndham's brigade under Gregg comes from from kind of the west to east. Mm-hmm. So as the Confederates are coming in from the right, let's say, the Federals are coming in on the left, kind of right at the same time at Fleetwood Hill.
Just a clash.
This is half of Gregg's, or this is one of Gregg's divisions under Wyndham, and they come fight, and then this is kind of the fight for Fleetwood Hill. So all focus, at least for this time, for Stuart's men, except for what Rooney Lee's doing up at U Ridge, just handling Buford up there. Mm-hmm. This is like the battle. This is where Stuart's headquarters was. This is a spot that commanded the landscape, at least the southern landscape of the battlefield. It overlooks the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. It, you can see buildings from Brandy Station off to the distance, so it's a commanding spot. And the Federals know that, and the Federals are going for it. And some of the first regiments to get engaged are regiments like the 1st New Jersey. And they're actually going to have, I believe it's their colonel, at least their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Virgil Broderick, and the second in command will be killed. They say Colonel Broderick fought like a lion. Wherever the fight was the fiercest, his voice could be heard cheering on his men, and his revolver and saber dealing death. He'd be mortally wounded, and
it's a hell of a way to go.
Yeah, and Wyndham himself would go down with a leg wound. So this fighting up here is vicious. At the same time this happens, and this is just some, like I said, heavy cavalry fighting. As at the same time when Hampton's guys arrive, and start, turning the tide for the Confederates on there. Kilpatrick's men under Gregg are going to come in and kind of fill. They're going to come from the direction of the southeast, moving to fill the middle area of Fleetwood Hill. Regiments like the 10th New York, 2nd New York, and 1st Maine Cavalry is going to come and kind of fill this and just hit them from the side. Kilpatrick, there's a great account of his engaging with the Confederates up there, that he runs into an old classmate of his from West Point on the other side, and the Confederate spotted Kilpatrick, fired his pistol at him, and missed. And Little Kill, it says, as he was known, drew his saber, and the officers fenced. Both men fought like tigers at bay, said a soldier. And he slashed again, killing the Confederate, riding away, and proclaimed, "That right's a wrong. I have wanted to meet him ever since the war commenced." So this is personal stuff, and I think a lot of people forget. I know infantry fighting, especially when you're doing hand-to-hand combat, it's pretty intense. But for the most part, cavalry, and I guess, for instance, when you're dismounted, though, this isn't the case, but from what I've seen and researched and stuff, that's, you're up in there. You're slashing sabers. You are charging through lines, into lines. It's a pretty personal,
a lot of moving parts,
pretty personal fight. And to, even to draw a sword at someone and you're not even using a gun is a little more personal of a,
And it's interesting to see, too, that Kilpatrick has such a bitterness towards an old friend and an old classmate. I mean, because usually, speaking in terms of like the Civil War as a whole, classmates from West Point or wherever they may have attended were still kind of friends if they ever kind of happened upon each other on the battlefield or at the surrender or wherever the case may have been. I mean, like Custer and Rosser, for example, at Tom's Brook, and like them kind of, chasing each other around just to mess with each other and that kind of thing. That's like a kind of a friendly little gotcha in the middle of a horrible war, whereas Kilpatrick over here is like really ready to kill one of his, what you would think would be a friend in the middle of, I mean, obviously war probably does a lot to you, but like it's one of those things that's like kind of crazy to think about, like killing a friend and a classmate in the middle of something like that.
Well, that whole brother against brother thing.
It's real. It's very real. And it's a sad thing to think about, but that's one of the ones that you have to really put into perspective.
And I think stuff like this, these accounts, especially the accounts that are published and ones that have been researched, really help, like you said, put it in perspective, how intense this war was, the fighting was, how personal it was at times. And it's something that, wars within the past 100 years of wars have not taken place on American soil. So,
right.
It's kind of, this sense of detachment from, the war's not here. So,
but this is literally in your backyard.
That's why I think if people, learn a little, not learn more, but like just,
cared more.
Read the interpretive sign that's next to your house. Read the the sign you drive by on your way to work every day. I'm sure it'll open up your eyes to a little bit more of what happened there not so long ago.
Right.
The blood that was shed, so close to home. So, definitely. Yeah.
Shout out Civil War Trails and all the other folks that bring those interpretive markers to your backyard.
Yeah. Check them out. They're great resource. But as Greg's force is going to arrive, like I said, in with Wyndham and Kilpatrick to meet the Confederate defense that's being set up per se at Fleetwood Hill. From here, Stuart will bring more artillery to, because Fleetwood Hill is not just a solid hill. It's a long hill, very similar to like the hill that I mentioned in the video we posted on Facebook about Starfort, the Strines Hill.
Line.
Yeah, it's a ridge line. Fleetwood Hill runs for about, I think it's 2 miles.
Wow.
2.5 mile ridge that runs like, southeast to northwest.
Odd that they would call that a hill, but go ahead.
Yeah. And at the very end of it is the position where, close, it bumps up to the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, and this is where this heavy fighting with Stuart and Greg's men are going to take place. But, going back to what Buford's doing on U Ridge, Rooney Lee's brigade is going to fall back across U Ridge to the northern end of Fleetwood Hill, so the opposite end. Buford will then engage there, but at that time, Mumford's cavalry will arrive around 4 p.m. And after Mumford arrives on the battlefield, Buford decides to withdraw, crossing back at Beverly's Ford. I think by the time Mumford arrives, he's going to try and hit Buford's flank, but Buford's already said and done. This battle, I guess it's considered a Confederate victory.
That's what they call it.
Yeah, and they ultimately at the end of the day, Confederates still hold the ground. The Federals were the one that initiated the attack,
and they fell back.
The Confederates got beat in the sense of it, physically beat. Like it was not.
They barely held it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like Stuart's justification for claiming victory was the fact that he held the field at the end of the day, like you said. However, Pleasanton's cavalry really demonstrated that they could work as a unit here. I mean, by operating as a real cavalry corps, flanking, doing all the things that they needed to do to kind of keep the Confederate cavalry on their toes. Now, I will say, to Stuart's credit, 9,500 of his men against 11,000 Federals, including infantry. Yet Pleasanton still could not take the field and, really give a definitive defeat. It's it's difficult to kind of say one way or the other. I can say Stuart did do his job in repelling the Federal cavalry from finding Lee's position, kind of knowing what Lee is up to in terms of, moving northward and all of that good stuff. But Pleasanton kind of did set the stage here for Federal cavalry being a dominant presence in Virginia and just throughout the war in terms of the Eastern Theater. So he kind of did accomplish something in that, and that's not anything to kind of, turn a blind eye to. Now you'll see that I don't think Hooker was too happy with him getting pushed back, so to speak, but I think there was kind of a miscommunication there, because apparently what Hooker had said was kind of locate the Confederate cavalry force and destroy them, whereas Pleasanton was more so under the assumption that this was a reconnaissance type of thing, like locate them, kind of do what you can, engage if necessary, and that was kind of the extent of it, or at least that's Pleasanton's, I guess, alibi in terms of why he had to get repulsed by a inferior force.
Yeah, and I mean, keep in mind the Federals, to be able to get into position at the fords without being detected at that point, the Confederates had no idea that,
and that's not easy to do.
No, the Confederates had no idea that there was Federals sitting on the other side of Beverly's Ford. So for them to cross in the morning and just wait, this is what you're greeted with is Buford's.
That's a wake-up call.
Yeah. So it was a big wake-up call, I would say, I think the whole Gettysburg campaign's a wake-up call for Confederate cavalry because of this Federal cavalry. Yeah, I think the Federal cavalry performed really well for what they did.
Right.
But at the end of the day, like you said, Stuart holds the field. Lee actually watches part of this battle from, what's the house called? It's not, maybe it's Beauregard or, I don't know. I think I had Barber. Is it Barber? Yeah, I think it's the Barber house or Beauregard. I don't remember.
Wouldn't be Beauregard. No, that's a different one.
Okay, but Lee watches the battle, at least the fight on Fleetwood Hill,
because you can probably see that from
exactly.
Culver,
you can, yeah. So that's actually an interesting thing to note, because I'm sure at times it wasn't a pretty sight on Fleetwood Hill, because it was so back and forth. You had these guys and these guys took the hills, and I mean it was ferocious fighting for this. All reality, it was a smaller piece of ground. If you go I mean, it's not small in the sense, but when you actually see the crest of the hill and where you can see exactly where these guys came up, I mean, it's like, crazy to imagine. That I'm gonna add as well that if you haven't been, I would encourage anyone to go out to this battlefield or
to understand the landscape.
Yeah, and we'll say this with every battlefield, hence the name Battlefields in Bourbon. But so the Brandy Station, I think it's like a couple thousand acres that are controlled by the American Battlefield Trust out there, and it's a preservation efforts that begin in the 80s, and the possibility of office warehouses and Formula One racetracks that were planned out there, and
thank God that wasn't the case.
All kinds of possibilities, but there's just been a core group of individuals that have dedicated their resources and time and knowledge to help protect that piece of ground, and through the work of the American Battlefield Trust, as well as groups like the Brandy Station Foundation, which is a nonprofit group that owns and interprets the Graffiti House, which I've never been to and I really want to go to. The Graffiti House that's there, I think that's in Brandy Station in the town.
I believe so.
Yeah, and they're dedicated, and there's I think it's like the Culpeper Battlefield tours, do a lot of opportunities to get out there and get guides, as well as do them on car, via hiking, or horse riding.
So you can kind of experience it for yourself from horseback.
And when I first heard that, I was like, why do they do horses? But then I was like, oh, it's a cavalry battle. And you can do that at a lot of other national parks as well, and state parks do the horseback riding on the park. So that's a cool little aspect they have. And currently it's all interpreted and owned and maintained a lot of this land we were talking about, from the attacks of Buford's men at St. James Church to right up to the stone wall at U Ridge to specifically Fleetwood Hill or Miller House Hill, whatever you want to call it. All these landmarks I was discussing are preserved. Small portions like where the airport is and some other development that's there. But I mean, for the most part, this is a pretty well preserved battlefield, and you can visit these areas. You can visit where, where Buford's Knoll or Buford viewed the battle, the ground where Stuart was riding back and forth from the vicinity of St. James Church to Fleetwood Hill. And you can really put in perspective, the ground that they had to cover, but then also where these attacks were coming from. You can actually go to the site of where St. James Church was, even though it's not there now. It was, and we can go into this a little bit in a second, it was disassembled later for winter quarter huts. But the American Battlefield Trust has done a really good job with like an augmented reality experience where, based off of a sketch that was done before the building was the church was torn apart, they use that sketch to develop you can scan the ground and it pops up.
Kind of an idea of what it would look like now.
What it would look like, yeah.
Right.
And you can go inside and stuff like that. It's weird, but so you can definitely get a feeling, and that's what I recommend. I mean, so my book recommendation for this episode is Out Flew the Sabres. It is by Eric Wittenberg and Dan Davis. And it's part of the Emerging Civil War series. And these books are great for your first taste of a battle. So your first introduction.
A beginner's guide.
The beginner's guide, I would say. So if you're looking for something a little bit more in depth, this probably isn't what's for you. But if you're just getting your toes wet with a battle, this is huge, because with it, short chapters, but they explain it very well. Have great maps. And they also have built-in chapters on touring the battlefield. So using the book as a tour guide in a way and telling you how to get from place to place. Another spot like we didn't mention that's a part of this, as much as all the fighting that takes place at Fleetwood Hill, is down by Stevensburg, which is a little bit, I guess, south of everything, but
southwest.
Yeah.
Southwest, I think.
But
don't quote me on it.
Yeah. Dufay's guys with Greg's, Dufay split off from Greg after crossing Kelly's Ford and headed in the vicinity of Stevensburg to then move towards Brandy Station, and they'll come into some contact there too. But this book, Out Flew the Sabres, does a nice job of explaining that action and tying it in with the greater action, which just really puts in perspective, if you go out there to drive it, walk it, or hike it, how large this battle is. It's pretty huge. Like I said, but the gap between the fords is 6 miles between Beverly's Ford and Kelly's Ford.
And that's enough as it is. I mean, obviously on horseback, it's a little easier to cover in terms of the ground, but I mean, even still, you've got quite a wide variety of, not wide variety, but wide landscape, to cover for a battlefield, for one single battlefield. I mean, that's a lot of ground.
Yeah. And a lot of this land, and this is what's neat about this whole area, is it doesn't just get, christened by fire during the Battle of Brandy Station. It's seen to encampments and actions in 1862, as well as, early before this battle in 1863, and then afterwards with all the encampments and stuff that take place. This, I think, Culpeper Courthouse, ends up being like a large federal depot for supplies because of the rail and its location. And then, I think I don't know what corps it is, but a lot of Federals. This is there's tons of photographs taken of these camps too. This is when St. James Episcopal Church is going to be torn down in 1964 for this, encampment. I guess from an archaeological perspective, metal detecting perspective, I know you've happened to wander from time to time into the county of Culpeper.
Yeah.
But Mr. Filbert, do you have any kind of background or description on what's been found out there archaeologically?
So believe it or not, I have personally never hunted that area. That's one that's on my list. Right now I don't have the detector that's capable of doing so. VLFs don't work very well in a highly mineralized environment. But from the organized hunts that have been conducted there, there's been quite a few different groups that have held group digs at these spots, mainly Battle of Brandy Station stuff, the camps surrounding that area. I mean, there's been some really great stuff that's found. I mean, a lot of very rare belt buckles that would be attributed to certain Confederate regiments, Confederate states, things that you really don't see very often, that are just crucial to the archaeological record in terms of that. Artillery shells, those are always great because you can kind of tell, based on what shell you've got, the size of that shell, what kind of gun that would have come from, and then you can kind of do your research and figure out maybe what battery that came from if you're in their line of fire and that kind of thing. I mean, there's a lot of really cool stuff that you can kind of draw from that. And I know one group hunt, something that was really cool of note, was a case of Shaler bullets was found in a camp. And I think this might have been, I don't want to say for sure because I don't know off the top of my head, and I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was the Excelsior Brigade camp, so a New York camp. It was a case of Shaler bullets, and I think it was close to like 1,000 of them this fella found. And for those of you listening that don't know what a Shaler bullet is, I mean, for relic hunters and archaeologists and historians and stuff, Civil War bullets all have patent names. There's so many different kinds, and it's just crazy. There's like Gardner's, Sharps, Enfields, different names for different bullets by the people that design them. Well, this one is called a Shaler, and this bullet is 3 pieces. So there's a top, middle, and bottom section of this bullet, and they all fit together almost like a puzzle piece, like a nesting doll. I don't want to say a nesting doll. That's kind of an odd analogy, but they fit together piece by piece. And the idea for this bullet, as kind of an experimental round, is that when you fire it from your revolver, as it leaves the muzzle, it breaks apart into its 3 pieces. And it's more so like buckshot for a revolver, but in a odd sense because I don't know. It's a tough one to kind of explain, but it's a very unique and very rare bullet. And
there was a case of them found.
But yeah, the fact that this guy found almost 1,000 of them in one single hole, because it was literally a crate. I mean, the nails and I think some of the wood even was still there from the crate. I mean, to find that is just a monumental find, and to attribute it to those camps or that battle is really something to appreciate, because, I mean, otherwise it would have been left in the ground forever and nobody would know that it's there or that it was attributed to that battle or that regiment or whatever the case may be. And I mean, it's really something that I get excited about, and I know a lot of other archaeologists and relic hunters get excited about, because that's something that deserves to be brought to light. I mean, that's a find of a lifetime.
Yeah, I think especially in like pointing to that is this Culpeper County, Fauquier County, this area of Virginia, the Virginia Piedmont, is probably in the Virginia Piedmont, that area is the most, Civil War area. That doesn't make any sense, but like where the most happening. Like how when people say Winchester, tons happen here, obviously, battles, skirmishes, but then also just occupations. This is, for the Virginia Piedmont, Culpeper County is kind of the same.
Oh yeah.
With, the mountains, the camps, for any, like the Overland campaigns or the Gettysburg campaign, a lot of these other campaigns start and go through here. Mm-hmm. Like, the Second Manassas campaign, and what other ones are there? I mean, there's a ton, but and they all go through Culpeper, which is, pretty crazy. So there's a lot to see. A neat thing, and kind of going off what I was saying earlier, I said a lot of this land is preserved and owned by the American Battlefield Trust. And I think just through some legislation in the Virginia General Assembly and just Virginia State Legislature, they've been able to plan for that area to become another Virginia State Park.
Nice.
So all that,
Very good.
is, like Rappahannock Station, Brandy Station, Cedar Mountain, all these lands that have been preserved by the American Battlefield Trust, Kelly's Fort, like all these will be a part of this, like Culpeper Battlefield State Park. So, not saying it's like done bad now. It's done great. ABT does a great job out there. But, to be able to have a state entity manage, maintain, interpret, and, in perpetuity, is huge. Because those resources will be, protected. And the Virginia State Parks do a great job for the most part with a lot of the battlefields they maintain, like Sailor's Creek and some other ones down, Southside Virginia. Mm-hmm. So it's, it's exciting to see that they're working their way, and, the Commonwealth stepping up and doing its part in maintaining and interpreting these Civil War site. So that's huge.
Putting those tax dollars to good use, huh?
Exactly.
We love it.
So yeah, that's a a kind of a cool thing. And I think when you go out to the battlefield now and you read the interpretive signs, I think there's some that even mention that that's the plan for the site. So
good.
It's cool to see and a next step for these battlefields and the great work of preservationists and historians. It's like a wipe your brow, take a breath, good work. It's to get to that point, it's like a full circle moment. So that's exciting to see for this area of Virginia. And it's an interesting battle. So we encourage everyone to go out there, grab that book, Out Flew the Sabers by Wittenberg and Davis. It'll get you set up and right for the opening of the Gettysburg campaign, really. And technically this was a little backwards from our first episode, but we couldn't pass up Second Winchester, and I don't think we could continue with the first couple episodes we had planned without mentioning Brandy Station. It's an interesting one, and one that I've learned about recently, within the past year, that I've decided to dive a little deeper into, and I still have a ton to learn, obviously. But it's a neat one to study.
Yeah.
And
a great battle. I mean, as great as the battle can be, if you want to call it that. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely one that's worth mentioning. And I mean, you can't really, like you said, you can't really go further than Brandy without doing an episode on Brandy, because every episode in the Gettysburg campaign that you do after that, you're going to be referencing Brandy Station. So you got to get that one out of the way first, so that way people kind of have an idea for the framework of the campaign going forward. So
this
once
sets
we start
the tone.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think to be able to, especially with some valley battles we talk about, to be able to mention where the Federal cavalry came from, ends up, and how it gets to where it is, without mentioning Brandy Station, or at least Hooker's reorganization of the army, it's you got to talk about this, and especially it's just interesting to note too that how planned and strategic the thought was with this attack. I mean, those 3 infantry regiments were handpicked to be a part of this. They weren't just 3 random infantry regiments that Pleasanton or whoever attached to the cavalry. These were the best marchers too. So they could keep up. They wanted guys that could keep up with the horses.
Yeah.
Not obviously to a pace, but to be able to not be, straggling behind if they needed to, and then pump them in. And then keep in mind too, I'm pretty sure I was talking with a historian buddy of mine and mentioning how, I was trying to figure out how to define this battle, like we said at the beginning of the episode. And he was saying how, those Federal infantry regiments, but also Ewell's Corps is on their way, obviously we know, to the valley, and but before they're headed out of Culpeper, the area of Culpeper Courthouse, they're stopped because of Brandy Station, the fighting here, and then they're like, okay, you guys can continue.
I'm
so there's
glad you brought that up.
There's a moment where it's like, Ewell, do I need you? And then it's like, nope, no, you can continue on. So it's crazy to think that that much attention was being brought. It wasn't like that's why there's this sense, at least the way I interpret this, it's like, for how prepared Stuart tried to make himself to be, he wasn't as prepared as he thought.
He could have used the help.
For sure. Oh, and
to define a solid victory without any question about it, and avoid all the criticism from the Southern papers or Pleasanton maybe thinking he's got a victory in mind. He could have used the help. And I'm glad you brought that up, because it's crazy to me that Lee is watching this battle go down and isn't telling someone, hey, get Longstreet's Corps or get Ewell's Corps
and pump them
into the battle. Like, you're right there. Why would you not throw one of them in, at least a division or something in there?
I think that's something I want to research more of, because it's like,
why didn't he?
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. Yeah, you're just like, you're the general and you're watching. It's like, what would happen if the Federals took Fleetwood Hill, and you're like watching that happen, and you're like, oh crap, I should have.
Now what?
Yeah, it's like, why watch? Why stress yourself out with that? And I think there's even something during the battle I read before about how the 1st Maine Infantry, when they do their charge up Fleetwood Hill, they like continue and they like get really close to where Lee's at the house watching.
Wow.
Yeah, I someone will correct me if that's not right, but I'm pretty sure from what I talked and read about that, like, it was something with the 1st Maine, and they get really close to Lee. But it's I don't know, it's a really I definitely have more to learn. And this is just, I started reading and studying and going out in the field with this battle. Like I said, I think I was telling you before the podcast, at the beginning of the year, I went out with some coworkers and it was terribly windy and cold, but we hiked, as much as we could. And to be, like I said, to be on the ground is totally different than looking at these maps. And, you're like, oh, there's a hill here, there's a hill here, there's a woodlot here. And there's like, oh, but to be able to like, go, okay, well, they crossed a ravine. And then to stand at the lane, the road where the Confederate guns were near St. James Church, and then look across the field that the Federals would have charged at you. And then it's like, oh, there's that ravine I read in the accounts.
Right.
It
it's
really
still there.
Puts it all together.
Super cool stuff.
Yeah, it's really cool, and I'm definitely gonna have to go back out there soon to try to. Yeah, I definitely want to try and do one of those videos again, like I did for Starfort.
Yeah,
with
maybe that'll
Brandy
inspire
Station.
us for a little field trip. Or something.
Yeah, that's our goal with these two, is to be able to try and do some field trips with them. So
yeah, bring it to our viewers. I mean, get you guys as close to the action as possible, because I know not every viewer we have is based in Virginia or close to these battlefields. I mean, it's not realistic that everybody can make it out here, but when that's the case, we can bring it to you if we can record it and, do an episode or a little reel where we can show you guys in person or in video how this actually went down.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we'll try to bring you guys as much, like Elijah said, as much resources and information and pictures and videos as we can as we go to these places, because we've got the benefit of, living in the Shenandoah Valley and being close to valley battlefields, but also on the other side of a mountain from a lot of these other national parks and
a wealth of history.
Yeah, tons here. So, this was Brandy Station, and you poured another glass of bourbon over there. So
just a little taste, wet the palate. A little, nightcap.
Well, that sums up this episode 2.
We're excited for episode 3.
Yeah, episode 3, we've got it planned, and that'll be coming to you, I think, the first week in August, or second week in August. We've got that coming out. I don't remember.
The bi-weekly schedule.
Yeah, the bi-weekly schedule. You should expect at least 2 episodes a month from us, posted every Wednesday. Is the plan. Not every Wednesday, but 2 Wednesdays a month.
And if we don't do it, give us hell for it, all right?
Yeah, hold us accountable. We've got a couple episodes planned out. We will let you in on a little secret for episode 3.
Kilpatrick. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, Kilpatrick and
Stewart.
Our first guest. Our first guest on an episode. I'll say that now. So we're excited to have that guest on and talk about the topic. And thanks for tuning in. And don't forget to follow and like our pages.
Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all the good stuff. Give us a follow, give us a like, a review, whatever you want. It helps us out, and it helps us bring more great content to you guys. We're happy to do this. And we love the following that we've built so far. It's been quite a humbling experience just receiving such positive feedback so far. If you guys want to help us out, we'll help you out. So I guess that'll do it for us for episode 2. Tune in August, and we'll have episode 3 for you. All right.
Thank you, guys.